Hey there, welcome back to my channel. I am so glad that you are here. And welcome to your Sunday if you're actually watching this video on the day of its actual upload. So, wow, so much to cover in this video here. And so interesting because you're so anti the day that I'm having at this point, meaning it's a beautiful day, a beautiful Sunday, gorgeous outside, gorgeous even inside, as far as it not being so excruciating hot like it's been all summer long. But then, of course, I got to open up with a story about this. But it's not, I guess, all bad, but it definitely does stem from the horrors of, the depths of the horror, I guess is a better way of putting it. But it is an update, as you can see by the title. I had actually been covering this story for a little while, and the last couple of situations in regards to the Menendez brothers actually seeking for new trials, maybe going through the parole system to try to see if they can lessen that time. There was a decision that was made that allowed for their original sentence, I believe, to basically be somewhat adjudicated, and then therefore it can go through some of the new processes. It allowed them to be able to move their parole request, I believe, is what that was, in order to make that happen sooner, maybe rather than later. So lots of things going on right there. This has been a long-standing case situation between the two brothers that are all very much familiar with at this point. They also have a Netflix series in regards to this particular case. So there's a lot of information out there as well. But we all know the premise of it really is a horrific unaliving that took place by two brothers who took out their parents, Kitty and Jose Menendez. And it has been an ongoing situation in regards to people's feelings and opinions being split on whether or not they should be able to, move freely around the world at this point, or to continue being incarcerated for the life sentences that they both received. And so at this point now, the cases have been put in place into where they now can have parole, because I believe they both were not awarded the ability to have parole, but then with this new change, it allowed them to have that. And since they've been in for about 32 years or so, or 30 years, I think right now at this point, they were able to go through the parole. Might have been a little bit more than 30 years, because I think the actual unaliving took place 36 years ago. But nevertheless, it's going to be in this sharing. And so we'll go over that as well for those of us who need a refresher about what's going on. So we're going to get into at least 3 parts in regards to this particular update, again, because it is an update that to the stories that I've already been sharing on previous videos. So if you haven't had an opportunity to check those out, maybe you can do so. It is on the platform, of course, kind of gets you to the point of what has happened at each time, and going from there. So again, this one is going to be broken up into 3 parts. One, we're going to talk about Eric Menendez separately and Lyle Menendez separately. Of course, they're intertwined, so there'll be some information that might go across both sharings, but for the most part, there's going to be some specifics that are going to deal with those 2 individuals separately. And then also their third part that will capture the new trial requests that end up being denied by a judge. So let's go ahead and get into the sharing, starting off with part 1, and find out where we're at, where they stand, where they're going to go next, and maybe see if there's anything potential that we can look at that possibly were happening with these 2 brothers because of the change now and allowing them to at least now go up for parole. So let's go ahead and get into it. Now, our first sharing is coming to us by way of ABC News, and it shared that Eric Menendez was denied parole and Lyle Menendez was going to learn his fate the following day, which we now know his fate as well. So the board had said that he can next be eligible for parole in 3 years. So that's where we're at. As far as Eric Menendez, he'll be able to go up for parole again in 3 years from now. Let's go ahead and further go into the area of the sharing, which it does let us know that Eric Menendez was denied parole during his first ever parole hearing of that past Thursday, 36 years and 1 day after he and his brother had unalived their parents, Jose and Kitty Menendez. Now, Eric Menendez, now 54, attended the nearly 10-hour hearing via video from the Richard J. Donovan Correctional Facility in San Diego. The board said he can next be eligible for parole in 3 years. Now, the board based its decision on multiple factors, including his behavior in prison, burglaries he participated in before the unalivings, and the unaliving of his mother. Now, the unaliving of your mother especially showed a lack of empathy and reason, Commissioner Robert Barton said. Barton noted that Eric Menendez could have left his parents' home since he was 18 and could have gone to the police or stayed with relatives. We recognize and understand that many SA victims find it hard to come forward, especially when the perpetrators are family members, Barton added. Eric Menendez said he unalived or pow-powed his mother because she had betrayed him. I saw my mother and my father as one person after I learned that she knew about Jose Menendez allegedly essaying him. So when I was running into the den, I was in a state of terror, of panic, of rage, he said. Now, Barton noted that it is Eric Menendez's behavior in prison, not the seriousness of the crime, that is the primary reason for this denial. Contrary to your supporters' beliefs, you have not been a model prisoner, and frankly, we find that a little disturbing, Barton said. Barton noted that Eric Menendez's inappropriate behavior with visitors, drug smuggling, misuse of state computers, and violence incidents. The board also took issue with Eric Menendez illegally using cell phones by leading rehabilitative groups. We find that you continue to pose an unreasonable risk to public safety, Barton said. After denying him parole, Barton said to Eric Menendez, you have two options. One is to have a pity party, and then you can become a self-fulfilling prophecy, probably not getting granted parole next time, or you can take to heart what we discussed. I hope that the people that are out there supporting you continue to motivate you, Barton said. Now, Eric Menendez's aunt and Jose Menendez's sister, Terry Parole, said at the hearing, although I love my brother, I have fully forgiven Eric. Eric carries himself with kindness, integrity, and strength that comes from patience and grace. Parole 85, who's battling colon cancer, had added, more than anything, I hope I live long enough to welcome him into my home, to sit at the same table, to wrap my arms around him. Now, Eric Menendez's relatives, who have been pushing for his release, said in a statement after the hearing, while we respect the decision, today's outcome was, of course, disappointing and not what we hoped for. But our belief in Eric remains unwavering, and we know he will take the board's recommendation in stride. His remorse, growth, and the positive impact he has had on others speak for themselves. We will continue to stand by him and to hold to the hope he is able to return home soon. Barton said he was amazed by the support from Eric Menendez's relatives, but he added two things can be true. They can love and forgive you, and you can still be found unsuitable for parole. The parole hearing for his brother, 57-year-old Lyle Menendez, will be on Friday, which has now since passed. Tomorrow, which was the day after of the actual decision for Eric, we will return our attention to Lyle's hearing. The statement from the brothers' relatives continued. And while it's undoubtedly difficult, we remain cautiously optimistic and hopeful that the commissioner will see in Lyle what so many others have, a man who has taken responsibility, transformed his life, and is ready to come home. The board members' decision focused on one question: would Eric Menendez pose an unreasonable risk to society if released? Now, Los Angeles County District Attorney Nathan Hochul opposed the Menendez brothers' release, claiming they have not demonstrated full insight into their crimes or shown that they have been fully rehabilitated and therefore continue to pose a risk to society. A recently completed risk assessment said Eric and Lyle Menendez posed a moderate risk to the community if released. The assessment revealed the brothers possessed illegal cell phones in prison, among numerous other violations, though many are not recent. However, Eric Menendez had a phone as recently as January of this year, which Hochul stressed was during the resentencing effort when he should have been on his best behavior. Barton said he considered the risk assessment report to be neutral. The brothers were initially sentenced to life without the possibility of parole for the 1989 unalivings. Lyle Menendez was 21 and Eric Menendez was 18 at the time, and the brothers said they committed those unalivings in self-defense after years of abuse by their father. Now, this May, Judge Michael Jessic resentenced Eric and Lyle Menendez to 50 years to life in prison, making them immediately eligible for parole under youth offender parole laws. Now, Jessic noted he was moved by the supportive letters from prison guards and was amazed by the work the brothers had accomplished to better the lives of their fellow inmates. The brothers, who watched the resentencing hearing from prison, gave their own statements to the judge, admitting their guilt. Although his parole was denied, Eric Menendez can ask the parole board to review the case for errors, according to the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation. Separately, California Governor Gavin Newsom can grant clemency to the Menendez brothers at any time. So there we have it as far as Eric. And I'm going to actually leave some of my thoughts towards the end, or more or less to the end, after we go through each one of these parts, because a lot of what I'm going to be sharing here definitely can be taken a stride for both of the individuals. But as we see here for Eric, it was very plain. As you can see, they were looking at a lot of not just the actual act itself, but the infractions that happened throughout his time in prison. Because remember, when they were actually placed in prison, they were given life sentences, no possibility of parole. So it didn't matter really, honestly, to some extent, what they did. It wasn't going to change one way or another for them. So the fact that now that you're put up for parole, well, now all those actions now come into play. They come as part of the review. It doesn't matter, apparently, at when time that it happened, right? Because it's supposed to be giving an assessment of the amount of time that you were in. So, interesting points being made there. We do know, or, I'm aware of, and you might be aware of as well, that there was a lot of support for the Menendez brothers. That's why I think that things fell into place for the current judge at the time of that decision. Not really the current judge, because there's a new judge now, right? But Jessic, who made the decision to then change it from the full, life situation to 50 years to life, which automatically gave them that parole. So, with that, we're going to go ahead and pop into part 2, which is now Lyle's hearing and what took place during that time. And then we'll get to part 3, and then I'll go ahead and wrap up with some of my opinions and my thoughts. And I definitely want to know what you're thinking about this, how you feel about it as well. So definitely go ahead and respectfully leave those down in the comment section below so we can have a conversation about it. Definitely would love to know what you're thinking about when it comes to these really true challenging situation at best, and horrific for what took place at most, right? The fact that so many people are so split on this is a little bit shocking to me, I think. But yeah, I'd love to know your thoughts about it. So let's go ahead and get into what would be now part 2. And that would be with Lyle. So now this sharing is coming from the Wrap. And it shared that both Menendez brothers to remain in prison after Lyle's parole request was rejected. Now, Eric Menendez's petition was rejected the day before, as it shares here. And further, the sharing gives us that, like his brother, Eric, just 24 hours earlier, Lyle Menendez's request for parole was denied that Friday evening by California Parole Board panel. While the decision isn't final yet, it won't become official until the CPB review process is finalized, including a separate hearing where the panel will explain their reasoning for denying parole. Only rarely does the larger parole board overrule a rejection. And while California Governor Gavin Newsom has the power to make the final call, he has already indicated he will likely follow whatever CPB recommends. As such, it puts an end for now, at least to the Menendez brothers' quest to be released from prison, where they are currently serving 50 years to life for the 1989 unaliving of their parents. However, now 54 and 57, respectively, the brothers' efforts to secure release from prison isn't over. Both of them are petitioning the state for clemency and are separately seeking new trials. Now, as on the day of Eric's parole denial, I believe, and Friday's hearings, was held virtually from San Diego's Richard J. Donovan Correctional Facility for both brothers. Basically, they did it virtually. The Menendez brothers had unalived their parents, Jose and Kitty Menendez, on August 20th, 1989, when Eric was 18 and Lyle was 21. They had been in prison since their arrest and a few months later in 1990. Now, after a lengthy legal battle, their first court case infamously ended with a mistrial. The brothers were convicted and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole in 1996. Now, but in years after their conviction, they become an unlikely cause for celebrate. After a decades-long campaign for their release, they became eligible for parole in May of 2025. when a Los Angeles judge reduced their sentences to 50 years to life. Now, the reason given that they were younger than 26 when the crimes occurred, which according to local law makes them eligible, only because it shifted to the 50 years to life. But being eligible for parole and actually receiving it are very different matters, as both brothers learned this week, which was probably like a couple weeks ago now. So they're clearly not going to, stop with what is to be hopefully at some point some resolution going into their favor. I personally don't think that day is going to come anytime soon, but hey, could be wrong. I'm not in the eyes of what's going on there. I'm not in the minds of the people making those decisions. So we'll just have to see. But let's go ahead and talk about that new trial, right? Because like they said, they're not going to stop their quest. Of course, they're not. They've been trying for decades now to try to get, some type of movement in their case that allow their sentence to be reduced or for them to be released. If nothing else, to get out there that they had so much remorse for what had taken place. There's lots of documentaries that have gone, through over the, maybe even more than 10 years now, where we've been able to see their side of, whatever they wanted to tell us at the time. So let's go ahead and get into part 3. And that is what the status is of that new trial. Now, this update is a quick one, comes from NBC Universal, and it basically states that judge denies Menendez brothers' new trial and the latest setback. A Los Angeles judge has rejected Eric and Lyle Menendez's bid for a new trial. It comes weeks after the brothers were also denied parole, which now puts us into this time frame. Now, Lyle Menendez released a statement of Facebook calling the judge's ruling disappointing and saying the fight continues. So that is the update for the most part of what's going on with the brothers. It looks like they're going to continue to spend the remaining time in jail for the next 3 years before they can go up for parole again, unless something comes up before then that we're not seeing at this point. A new trial has been denied, so we're not going to see any movement in that. Don't know if a clemency situation is on its way. Don't see that, and I imagine the new trial, if that maybe that saves the clemency hearing, maybe so, I don't know. But at the end of the day, it looks like they're going to be staying put unless something else comes up. Now, I do want to know your thoughts on this for sure, as I do with all my videos here that I share these kind of stories with, because there is such a movement or a push that was happening. It seems like it's a little bit quieted down now, because as lots of things, when a cause comes up, it's a lot of fiery motion behind it sometimes, and sometimes it can wane depending on the situation. We saw this with Britney Spears, and individuals really pushing for her to be pulled out of her conservatorship. But in her case, it actually got to that point where she did get removed from conservatorship. So, that hashtag Free Britney situation became a real thing. And I do feel like the Menendez brothers probably thought, and it kind of looked like it potentially was going to go that direction, or could go that direction for them as well. There's a lot of sympathy being directed towards these two now middle-aged men for what was perceived to have maybe taken place, what they have testified at some point in the two trials that had taken place, and given the reasoning why they did the crime that they did at the time. Now, I remember at the time, like a lot of us who may be watching this video too, were obviously around and can remember some of the things that was going on in real time, and that was quite a big thing. It seemed like the situation of the essaying, which of course I'm changing some words around to keep things friendly, that came later on, and maybe even more of a focus in the second trial after that first mistrial, or maybe it came into the end of the first trial, but then really was a push for the second trial. And so, you look at things and the way that situations of this nature were looked at upon back then versus how it has changed over time, people's thought process when it comes to these types of things, the situation of retaliatorial unalivings for abuse, which is not a new thing, right? Because those could be considered self-defense depending on the situation. There's always a question about, or has been a question about, were these actions taking place after the abuse, during the abuse? There's always been this, challenge over the years, and you guys know, about when it comes to when it almost seems like when is it appropriate to do the thing, right? And so a lot of conversation, discussion, healing through people, therapy that comes out more now in conversation, really society getting more of maybe a clear understanding. I don't know if it comes from the perspective of because you're now seeing more and more people have gone through these types of things, or what really is turning the page, because the horrificness of those types of actions, all alleged at this point, because Jose and Kitty were never able to have an opportunity to be brought up on charges for that and go through that process. They decided to be their judge and jury and executioner all in one. So there are people split naturally, because there are some people who don't believe that those things happen, and there's some people who do believe that those things happened. And really, how and what does it mean for you as a person in a position that they were in, being young, and then not maybe feeling they had the type of outlets they needed to have in order to be able to stop what was happening, or whatever the things that were alleged. I believe over time, like in the second trial, but then there was conversations in different documentaries subsequently where they discussed where maybe other individuals, like other family members and friends, were being not consulted per se, but shared certain things that happened to the young boys when they were boys at that time. And so some of that information has come out, but I don't believe that a lot of that information was brought into the trial, because I feel like, if I can recall, and if you were, remember some of that testimony, or even watch Netflix, and it seemed closer to true to form, more documentary based versus just kind of, self-actualizing the situation, let me know, because I think that a lot of that stuff was maybe suppressed or, made difficult to come out in full force. So now times are different, years have gone by, and you wonder sometimes if certain situations that were ruled one way back then would have been ruled that way now. That can go for things that were allowed to go on back then that are so heinous that we know and knew then at that time, but are not allowed now. So, it's double-edged sword. The pendulum can swing either way, right? I mean, if justice would just be done correctly, then we wouldn't have this conversation. But, people are involved, and whenever people are involved, things can get really, really tricky at times. And unfortunately, not everybody has the same agenda or initiative in seeing things be done to the appropriate conclusion. So with that, I really would love to know your thoughts. Were you surprised that the parole was denied? Were you surprised that the hearing was denied at this point or rejected for that proposal? Do you think that something may turn about before the 3 years that might end up being a situation where the brothers will be able to get out? Or do you think that maybe they're going to end up doing that life sentence, even though it was reduced to 52 life? Another point of fact that I think about is the family. And a couple of points that was made in the part one when they were talking about Eric's parole hearing. And the gentleman had basically shared, and I say this all the time, just in regular conversation, 2 or 3 things, many things could be true at the same time. You could love someone and you could turn around and still have to give the type of adjudication to the situation that they put themselves in, or that they maybe, conduct, it's unfortunately, a lot of times, you'll come across stories where someone will do something that is like committing an unaliving, and then you may have family members sitting here acting as if, oh my gosh, you're the best thing in the world, and no, they wouldn't do this, and yet the evidence and whatever is there in front of you. And it's almost like you may feel like if you were to be able to give the accountability, to share the accountability, that means you didn't love that person. And I don't feel that that's true. My opinion on that is, 2 or 3 multiple things can be true at the same time. I can love you and I can support you and still hold you accountable for the things that you did that was wrong. It doesn't mean it has to be one or the other, irregardless of how that person may take what your decision is when it comes to that. And it's amazing and quite astounding how many times you hear that or see that people have, and not everyone, but that you see so many situations where the relatives or people, parents, a lot of times will sit there and deny the stuff when the evidence is right there in front of their face. And it's all because of this blindness of, well, I love them and they're whoever mine, so I'm not going to throw them under the bus. You don't have to throw them under the bus, but to act as if they're not guilty when it shows that they are. And these are those cases, not the ones that, there's questions about that, but just the ones that, yeah, this person did it, and to sit there and act as if, no accountability should be taken. And that means they're innocent just because I love them. that's not going to help anything. And it also does show a lot about sometimes why people can, in some cases, come to that positioning. Because if they've never been held accountable for smaller things growing up, and they've always been given a pass to everything they were doing, and we've seen many cases where then you see as they get older, yeah, well, I can see why they end up doing this kind of thing because they've never been told no. They've never been held accountable for actions that have taken place that they should have been. And so they go into life thinking that they can act and do any kind of thing to any kind of person in any kind of situation. And then here we go. So, you know, it's a difficult thing, and no one's saying that it isn't, and it can't be when if you were ever in a situation, and quite frankly, my heart goes to anybody who's ever in a situation that way, where you have a family member who's done something that it lands them in the position of being incarcerated for heinous crimes and such, and being in that situation of being a support and a love and having love for them, but still being able to understand that what they did was wrong and being accountable for that is what needs to take place, and you can still do that with love. So yeah, definitely would love to know your thoughts on any of that if you'd like to share as well, down respectfully in the comment section. And of course, as I always say, and I do appreciate so much when you guys do share your thoughts about that, because you are so respectful and kind about that, and really share really insightful points sometimes about these, whether we all agree on the same thing or not. And so I definitely do want to say I appreciate it, because a lot of these cases can be really, really hard cases, and sometimes these kind of cases are very similar to what people deal with in everyday regular life. Now, these two were regular, for all intents and purposes. They became celebritized because of the situation, and at the time, right, this was not something that you heard of, so it became an automatic, and then all the other parameters around that situation. But this could happen and has happened in many just regular non-celebritized family homes. So yeah, I definitely would love to know your thoughts. So definitely share those down below, and I again appreciate when you do. So with that, I think I'm going to bid you adieu. I'm actually going to be dropping another video later on today, and it's another update video. So definitely come on back, and I hope that you will. And if you have not become a member already, and when I say a member, just a kind of part of the family, right? Definitely, I hope you will hit the subscribe button and do so. And yeah, I guess in that, I'm going to bid you adieu. Thank you so much for hanging out with me and taking the time. And definitely share your thoughts below. So with that, I will see you later on. Make sure you come on back. Bye.